Now, we jump from Giotto. Giotto starts doing his thing, and I often refer to him as sort of the iPhone of Renaissance art, right? Some of you may not remember just what a mind-blowing thing it was when the iPhone came out. So before the iPhone, of course, we had cell phones. But a cell phone, you could make calls on it. You could call someone. You could maybe text someone. Some phones couldn't even do that. And you had this keypad, right, that was only numbers. So in order to get the letter you want, you had to hit a certain number on your number pad a certain number of times to get the particular letter you wanted. So texting would take forever. Maybe you were lucky enough that your phone had a small LED screen, and that LED screen would allow you to play games, right? That often you didn't download from the internet. Maybe if you were lucky, your phone provider would allow for certain games to be downloaded by a data transfer, or oftentimes you might download the game on your computer and then transfer it to the phone. And then the iPhones came out and could do all these amazing, crazy things that they could do. And I mean, to this day, that was 2007 when the iPhone came out. To this day, I've essentially got an iPhone, and this is not an iPhone. This is, this was a Samsung phone here. But essentially, I have another iteration of what the iPhone was, with its screen, with the apps, with the icons on there. It operates in the same way. It's got the camera on it, right? It's essentially what an iPhone was. And that was because everybody's mind was blown by the iPhone, and everyone said, oh crap, we got to catch up. Apple is leaving us behind. They are doing stuff that we weren't even thinking about doing yet. Giotto is that. Giotto comes along, he's doing what he was doing, and other artists say, whoa, okay, we need to kick our asses in gear because we got to catch up with what this guy is doing. So then we come to the 14th, in the 14th century, in the Republic of Siena, right there. So very close to Florence, which is also going to become very important at this time, around about this time. And in the Republic of Siena, it's this powerful city-state that has, in the 14th century, become wealthy apart from the church. Rinse and repeat. You're going to hear that a lot. This was due in large part to bankers and merchants who were investing their money in overseas trade. So individuals are starting to make money, right? Whereas in the Middle Ages, who had money? People who held land, kings, queens, the royalty, the lords and ladies who held the land, and the church. The church who could tell people who could have wealth and who could not. Now you have enterprising individuals, bankers, merchants, people who are building ships, who are investing in trade with other city-states, other countries, other parts of the world, other continents. And these are individuals who are doing their own thing. The city-state becomes wealthy as a result of their efforts, and it has nothing to do with the church. This meant that there were large reserves, large sums of monetary reserves that could be then used for things like commissioning artwork. So a weird thing happened, and I'm letting this play so that you can see. I was hearing what I hoped I was hearing was just rain on the roof, but I was also kind of worried that I was hearing a strange sound in another room. And so you saw I paused my video. I went and checked on it. When I came back to try to begin recording my lecture again, I want you to notice what's going to happen here. Yeah, that's right. The entire rest of my lecture recorded absolutely no sound whatsoever. I think I know what happened. I pulled the microphone out of my laptop, pulled the connector out of the laptop to walk away and go check on things. When I came back and plugged it back in, I guess my recording software just didn't recognize that I had plugged it back in. Well, at this point, it's late. I am so tired, and I don't feel like trying to record this entire last bit of the lecture again. I normally like to record these lectures new for each semester. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to an old lecture from a year ago and just grab the portion that would have made up what was remaining in this lecture, and I'm going to tag it on here. So you're going to see the 1 year younger version of myself. The audio quality might not be quite as good. I don't remember for sure. But anyway, my apologies. This is not how I like to do things. Thank you for your patience.
And so in the midst of all this, there start to be suddenly these large civic monetary reserves, meaning that the city had a lot of money that it was sort of hanging on to. And with that, they decide, like, again, civic pride, Sienna's the greatest city, so we need to get the greatest of the great in here. So they start commissioning artwork. Amongst the artists who come out, what's going to become the Siena tradition, are Duccio, whose last name I'm going to try to pronounce right now because I'm too tired and my brain won't let me get there right now. Duccio and his students and his students and his apprentices emerge at this moment, creating innovative works of art that allude to the coming Renaissance. Similarly to what's happening with Giotto, because Duccio clearly has looked at Giotto, and he sort of begins working in new, innovative ways in Siena and passing that along to his students and apprentices. So Duccio, born in 1255, died in 1319. Even though he is a little older than Giotto, he sort of arrives at working in this very naturalistic manner later than Giotto. So he's an Italian painter, active in Siena in the late 13th and 14th century during the Proto-Renaissance again. And he painted several important works in government buildings and churches and cathedrals. Now, again, that wasn't a thing that you would have seen in the Middle Ages for the most part. Artists didn't really spend a whole lot of time going into those areas painting projects that were meant for the people, right? If somebody painted for royalty, well, what they painted was meant for the royalty, right? The people weren't going to see that. Church commissions are what artists' main bread and butter had been. Now suddenly there are government buildings because the governments of a lot of these city-states are republics and or are democratic in some fashion. And those government buildings start also hiring artists because they really want to show off the greatness of their city-state. He's credited with creating what is referred to as the Sienese school of art, which isn't literally a school. It just means in this case, school is just another word for style. He develops the Sienese style, which took Byzantine formality, right, the stern formality of Byzantine art, and the new naturalism that's coming from Giotto, right? This idea that you should observe with your eyes and try to capture what your eyes are seeing. Paint that's naturalism. And combining all those two things and folding them in by taking religious subjects and humanizing them. We saw Giotto doing a little bit of that. Duccio and his students will as well. So there's this piece, the Maesta. This is a giant altar piece that he painted 1308, 1311. An altar piece would be a piece that would be on the altar in a church, and it would be behind the altar so that mass would be performed in front of it. It essentially provided a backdrop. And in the cathedral in Siena, parishioners would be on all sides of the altar, so it was painted front and back. Over here, where we see Mary enthroned on the left, that's the front of this. Over here, we have the right. Mary was the patron saint of Siena, since it was believed that she had helped them to defeat Florence in a battle that they had had back in 1260. But when Duccio painted this, civic pride was so elevated in Siena, and Duccio's mastery of painting at this point in time was considered so synonymous with what people saw as the success of Siena, that this particular piece was paraded from his studio through the streets of Siena, through the town center, to the cathedral, marched along for everyone in Siena to see. And Duccio was allowed to sign his name down here at the foot of Mary, which is a very new idea, right? That's something that wouldn't have been allowed for most of the Middle Ages. So at Mary's footstool there, we have his signature. The 7-foot tall central panel, this right here is 7 feet. So imagine how huge this whole thing is. That depicts the Virgin and Child enthroned, and she's surrounded by angels and other important saints, both biblical and saints that had been canonized by the Catholic Church after the biblical times. And then on the back over here, we have several smaller panels that depict stories from the life of Christ. And actually on the front and back, right? Down here we have some as well. These are stories from the life of Christ. And again, this kind of this is painted front and back because in that particular cathedral, parishioners could see the back of it as well. Here's that central panel with Mary in the middle. And if you've paid any attention at all over the past couple of weeks, you can see that is extremely Byzantine, right? He has studied what's happening in the Byzantine Empire and is incorporating it into his work. We have that austere formal composition, right? Everything is very stiff and sturdy. And there's even a certain amount of symmetry. It's not perfect symmetry, right? But if we draw a line down the middle here of Mary, if we see something on one side, it's echoed on the other side. If it's a person, right? Well, there's going to be a person, maybe not the same person, but a person in the exact same position on the other side, right? Everything's symmetrical and very sturdy and very, very formal, right? Very Byzantine in that way, right? Even the saints up here, they're mirroring one another. The figures and faces of the saints and the angels are still very influenced by Byzantine conventions, right? Like you look at these angels and you see the Byzantine generic face, right? All over. And down here, right, these are the four saints that are kneeling at her footstool here. There, however, we start to see some evidence of individualized observation, right? Like it seems like for this guy, these two over here, and some of the other people who are depicted here, there's evidence of, again, Duccio having picked out models and trying to make this character in his painting look like what he is observing while looking at someone that he's using as his model. That's very different from what the Byzantine era gave us. And he also, with the four of them, breaks from the stiffness of Byzantine poses as well, right? They feel much more natural and relaxed while they're kneeled down in this way. He's also fascinated with portraying fabrics, similarly to how Giotto was. But in his particular case, he's obsessed with getting the thin wispiness of fabric, right? And capturing that, and capturing the textures, the different textures of fabric, whether fabric is really thin and muslin-like, or whether it might be more velvety in texture. And like, you know, Giotto wasn't interested in that. Giotto was just thinking about sort of the planes of light and shadow that he needed, right? And that was pretty much kind of it. Right. In these particular cases, it feels softer, and it's not that sculptural approach to painting that Giotto had. Still, Duccio he's holding back here, right? This is the front. This is going to be, he knows his customers, and he knows his customers are still, you know, stuck in the Middle Ages way of thinking about things. So he doesn't want to break from his austerity too much here. He doesn't want to get too experimental. On the back, he got much more experimental. This is one of the panels, the portrayal of Jesus, that is painted in 1308 to 1311. We have some inventive storytelling here, right? Where we have Judas kissing Christ here, very central in the piece, right? Then over here, he has this way of storytelling where all of the elements of the story are kind of like happening simultaneously, right? So that we've got, like I said, Christ being kissed by Judas in the middle, Peter over here cutting off the ear, which would have happened after this, and then over here these apostles who are running away, all in one panel. And now in his case, the background is still very flat and very Byzantine, right? Let me move this. This doesn't quite feel like what Giotto was giving us, right? This doesn't feel like a shallow stage. It feels like a backdrop, and notice how the people just, their feet just sort of feel almost like they're floating there. This doesn't feel like it has that depth to it that Giotto gave us, right? So he's still hanging on to that a bit, but his way of telling the story with these people is not stiff, right? The figures are dynamic, not stiff at all. They move, they flow. Where these apostles are running away, we even get a sense of the the drama as their clothing swoops as they turn to run away, right? There's a sense of motion that we don't really see in very much artwork in the Middle Ages. We get the sense of observation, right? It feels like there's been a different model brought in for each of the characters. He's used someone and has painted these faces from observation, as well as the clothing. It looks like it's convincingly draped over a body that's underneath the clothing. Giotto was less concerned with that, right? Giotto is just looking at the light and the shadow, right? And thinking about how things, he's approaching the painting as if it were a sculpture. Duccio is thinking about there's the clothing, there are all the wrinkles, but there's also a body underneath that fabric, and that fabric should be falling over the body. And so what does that look like, and how do I portray that? He's even got different skin tones on different people. So he's even thinking about that with this. Emotions are shown on faces. Postures and gestures are used to tell the story and display a variety of different types of emotions. The way people are standing, the way their faces are. Again, the running away of this group over here to the right. It's a theatrical approach to storytelling in painting that is a decisive step toward humanism in painting. Now, yeah, Pietro Lorenzetti. He would have been one of Duccio's students. And he has a brother, Ambrosio, who we'll talk about as well. His contributions, as one of Duccio's students, his contributions to the Proto-Renaissance were some innovations in naturalism, pushing even further from what his teacher Duccio innovated, but also he's going to give us some early spatial illusion. He's going to do more than Giotto accomplished when it comes to giving an illusion of there being space within the painting. And this, of course, is a huge influence on the early Renaissance that would come after him. So he's got this particular painting here, The Birth of the Virgin. Now, there are all kinds of problems with the space that he's created here that, again, artists in the early Renaissance are going to figure out. But he's still figuring it out. But look at this. These are 3 panels of a painting on a wall, and he's having to work around some architecture that's already there, right? These arches here and the pillars in between were already in place. He's having to paint in between them. Well, so what does he do? Well, he does this pretty ingenious thing of making the whole thing look like it's an extension of the space that we're standing in, and that these pillars are actually kind of like blocking our view of things. And he does that by like putting tiles on the floor and using what is a crude form of linear perspective. That's something that the Renaissance will figure out later. And even the bed, by making sure that the bed has this kind of plaid patterning on it, he gives us a plane and then another plane, and the whole thing feels like it's sinking backward as if it was another room built onto the room that we are standing in as viewers of the painting. Now, there are problems with it. Individuals aren't the right sizes. They should be much bigger in some cases and much smaller in other cases. This is the birth of the Virgin. So this is an apocryphal story. It's not in the Bible itself, of when Mary was born. Mary's mother traditionally is named Anne. So this is Anne here. But notice, she's the furthest thing away from us. And yet she's almost the biggest human in the whole thing, right? She should be smaller when she's back there. So he hasn't quite gotten that figured out just yet. Now, Siena is, again, a good one to look at as far as sort of diving into the ideology of the late Middle Ages, the Proto-Renaissance, because, again, it was a republic. And this is the Palazzo Pubblico in Siena, Italy, that was built from about 1280 to 1300. This was the government building. So Siena was governed by 9 governors who were, appropriately enough, called the Nine. And their main job was to run the city-state. They were elected officials, and they would come here. And then they would do all the voting and decision-making and things of that nature. And this was the building that was built for this purpose. Now, you see that what we have here is a building that's been made to look somewhat like a castle. But again, it's a public building. People could come on in. And built onto it is a very medieval bell tower that would have been used as a bell for making announcements. But also, it's built tall enough that one could monitor the city and the surrounding countryside from up there. Now, interestingly, the building itself, this is just an image I pulled from Google Maps. The building is concave. You see how the facade of it sort of curves inward like this? And that's because they had to build it on a pre-existing street that was already curved. And that was a pretty interesting, architectural feat in doing that. But what's also important is that in front of it is this plaza, the Piazza del Campo, right? This is again symbolic of what's happening now, right? This big public plaza where people can come and hang out, do business, or people can just stand here and listen to announcements coming from the Nine in the Palazzo. That's a new idea, right? That suggests in ways that we've not seen during most of the Middle Ages that the people are the ones to be served here, right? Right, the people who are going to be standing in this area right here are the ones to whom the people who work here are responsible, right? Almost as much pride was taken in this city hall once it was built as the cathedral. And that's a new ideology, a new way of thinking as well. Now, notice, however, I mentioned it looks a little bit like a castle. And what's doing that are these ramparts that are up here, right? This would have been places for, that in a castle, soldiers would hide behind here and then could reach out and shoot arrows between there. Well, it's rare that any invaders ever got this deep into the city. This building is right in the middle of the city. So why do they have those ramparts there? Well, yes, it's a republic. Yes, the Nine were elected officials, but every now and then the worry is the people are going to rebel. And so if the people ever storm the public, the Palazzo Pubblico, they need to be able to defend themselves, and that's what this would have been for. It would have been for defense. To protect the Nine from the citizenry who might revolt and attack. Now, Ambrogio Lorenzetti, right? He's the brother to the other Lorenzetti that we just talked about. Also, Duccio's student. Also, he was the brother that we just mentioned, and he's particularly famous for his frescoes that are in the Palazzo Pubblico that we just looked at. And his contribution was adding new spatial illusionism to sweeping landscapes. For what his brother's doing for smaller spaces, he's doing this for really big, wide spaces. All right, so these are the murals that he painted. They are in the main, I'm going to mess up the Italian if I try to pronounce that, but this would have been the main meeting hall where the Nine would have met and had their discussions and made their decisions, right? And in this space, right, above the doors, on all four sides of this room, Ambrogio here painted these murals, right? On this side, right above this door, we have a couple of murals that when put together are called the effects of good government in the city and in the country, right? The city over here, the country over here. It's on the opposite side, right? So the side, one of the sides that we don't see in this photograph, so literally the opposite side of this, he had a painting, a fresco of the bad, the consequences of bad government in the city and in the country. That one is sadly in pretty poor condition because it was a fresco that was on the wall that was the outside wall of the building. So the temperature changes and weather and things from outside have kind of flaked it off over the years. But this one over here is in good shape. And it tells us a lot about what the people of Siena thought a good, safe place to live would be. And it was painted there and put above the heads of the Nines as a constant reminder that if your city doesn't look like this, then you're doing something wrong, right? Your job is to make sure that your city looks like this. So what do we have? We have a panoramic view of Siena that seems to be influenced by similar kind of slice of life townscapes from ancient Roman murals. He's clearly been looking at those and he's bringing it back. We haven't seen this kind of thing for 1,000 years. We see palaces, we see marketplaces, we see towers, churches, we see the city walls over here, right? The perspective is off and wonky and weird. You know, he's definitely still struggling with that, but we see him trying, right? If we just look at small little portions here and there, the sense of the depth of space is convincing. It's when we look at it as a whole that the different types of perspective throw things off. So what should the effects of good government in a city be? Well, we see the traffic is orderly, right? Everybody's moving through smoothly. There don't seem to be any fights, arguments, or pushing and shoving. People are peacefully selling their wares. We even have a group of ladies right up front who are dancing in the center, which would have been symbolic, a metaphor, if you will, for a peaceful commonwealth. But why? Well, it says a lot that these young women feel safe enough to just dance here out in a public area. They seem to be confident enough that they're not going to be accosted in some way so that they can stand out here and dance. They seem to be confident that this area where they are standing is safe. No one is going to harass them. No one is going to put them in physical danger. They can just sit here and happily dance without concern or worry. And again, as I was mentioning, we have some very early applications of perspective, but it's just not quite perfected yet. Then, on the outside of the walls, so on the right, this is the right side of that big giant mural, we have the peaceful country. This represents a pretty accurate depiction of the countryside surrounding the city of Siena. We have villas, we have old castles, we've got lots of farmland. Interestingly, again, there's storytelling happening here. We have the farmers. It's one scene, but we see the farmers working in different seasons of the year, all in this one image, right? Where we see planting happening in one area, we see harvesting happening in another area, things of that nature. And again, there's a orderly flow of people into and out of the city. Every person is doing their assigned job, right? There doesn't seem to be any unrest here. Everyone seems to again feel safe. Interestingly, up here in the upper left corner, we have the personification of security. This particular woman that we see flying up here would have been recognized as the symbol for security. Not unlike, say, the way that the Grim Reaper is the symbol of death, right? If you put the Grim Reaper up in the corner, you know death is being talked about. She's the symbol for security. What is she holding? She has in her hands here this scroll that promises to keep those safe who follow the rule of law, right? I promise to keep you safe as long as you are following the rules and paying attention to the laws. But, and this is a little hard to see, unfortunately my image cuts it off a little bit, but she's also in her other hand holding a little miniature gallows with a man hanging from them. That stands in as a reminder of the punishment if you don't follow those rules and laws. This particular painting, there's another particularly important thing about this painting, and that is that it is recognized by art historians as one of, if not the first pure landscapes since antiquity. And you're going to hear me say that a few other times as we get to other paintings or sculptures or buildings. I'll say this is the first fill in the blank since antiquity. This one gets recognized as one of the first, at least, if not the first, pure landscape to be painted since ancient Rome.
You know, originally I had planned to now dive into talking about the early Renaissance in Northern Europe. But this lecture has already gone on quite a bit, especially for your very first week of lectures. So I think I want to cut it short there. I'm gonna stop here, and I'm gonna add the conversation about Northern Europe tag it onto what I was going to cover next week. So you're going to get a little extra lecture from me next week. It'll be a bit more than what you got this week, okay? But with this being your first week, yeah, I think this is enough, especially since you also had that syllabus review to look at. So let's call it a week here. Snap. This is all you're responsible for this week. Next week, there'll be a bit more. Like I said, you're going to get more material from me than you did this week. Okay? Okay. All right. Well, yeah, there we are. Next week, we'll dive more into the Renaissance, a lot more. Yeah. So, yeah, I hope this was insightful. Take care, everyone. Bye.